In a corridor that smelled of burnished steel and fluorescent dread, they emptied her canvas bag across the cold floor lip. Bomb a dog-eared notebook, a single photograph while soldiers snickered, then a junior guard unlatched the final pocket and everything, voices, footsteps, even the ventilation hum cut to silence. Because the emblem he raised into the light was one they had been told existed only in Rumor 1, that meant every clearance in the building had just dropped below hers. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Tap the subscribe button. Lieutenant Commander Aurora Rory Vale had chosen obscurity. With the precision of a surgeon sewing a vein, no sudden movements, no loose ends. Just the slow, methodical stitching of an anonymous life far from battlefields that still flared behind her eyelids. Whenever she risked sleep, she lived now in the administrative underbelly of Falcon Ridge Air Logistics Center, a sprawling base carved into wind-covered prairie, where her name was stamped on forms that guided shipments of hydraulic seals and compressor blades, never on briefings that shaped the fates of nations. Each dawn she parked a sun-bleached sedan in the farthest row, walked the perimeter path past satellite dishes angled like frozen vultures, and let a world that once trembled at her core consign her to the same gray bureaucratic dust as everyone else. She was 43 tall without being imposing, her posture straight as habit rather than pride, dark hair pulled into a pragmatic knot that revealed the faintest white streak above her right temple, a single, accidental confession of age that the younger staff mistook for premature stress. They never guessed it recorded a firefight on a Syrian ridge where lightning from an incoming storm lit the hillside just long enough for her to drag 2 wounded operators out of the mud. The shockwave from the mortar that followed lifted shale and shrapnel and a ribbon of electricity that scorched her scalp and set the streak forever. She covered it now with the same indifference she applied to every scar it existed. It told a story no one needed to hear, so it stayed inside Building 9, the base's unloved logistics annex. Rory's office was a rectangle of pale green walls and humming diffusers, its single window facing a service alley, used mostly by trash trucks that arrived before dawn. She preferred it. The monotony dulled her brain just enough to let her body rest while her eyes processed requisition codes, serial numbers, transit routes. At noon she ate oatmeal softened with black coffee because sugar triggered memory flashes and memory flashes triggered headaches. Nothing about her routine invited attention, and attention was the enemy of erasure. 3 things, however, remained stubbornly unerased: the titanium dog tags that lay against her sternum, the carved wooden token in her wallet, a nondescript circle of cedar that smelled like home and had once bought her 30 precious seconds at a hostage gate in Chad, and the miniature leather case hidden in her canvas bag. It contained a pin no bigger than a postage stamp, a matte black falcon clutching a lightning bolt whose tail split into 4 talons. Officially, Special Operations Directive for call sign Red Falcon had never existed. Its insignia was the Navy's most buried secret, minted in a batch of 50 distributed to operators who agreed to disappear from public record. 32 of those operators were dead, 4 were missing. 13 were sealed behind classified identities so deep they could walk into the White House unchallenged. Rory was the 14th, but she had opted for an even darker shade of invisibility. She signed a remission clause, surrendered operational privileges, and melted into logistics, trusting the paperwork to bury her past. At 0600 hours on a blistering Wednesday in June, 2 events cracked her camouflage. The first was external, an encrypted communique from Joint Special Operations Command, requesting ground-level logistics projections for a black extraction theater somewhere east of longitude 50 east, an innocuous line item that nonetheless twisted in Rory's gut like cold iron. The second was mundane, yet catastrophic. Building 9's badge reader shorted out rerouting all personnel through the heavily militarized West checkpoint, usually reserved for flight crews and munitions convoys. Rory arrived just as the sun climbed over the radar domes, flaring off ballistic glass and sending spears of light across the asphalt. The queue was already 50 deep, serpentine and agitated, because the Westgate staff enjoyed their power far too much when regular support workers were forced into their domain. Clipboard sergeant, nobody knew his real name, paced the line barking orders, his mirrored shades reflecting every we see, every slump of shoulders. Rory kept her gaze on the ground and rehearsed the nothingness of her profile. Logistician, civilian equivalent, GS-12 access level to no anomalies. When it was her turn, she placed the canvas bag on the conveyor, palms flat, eyes low, calm. The scanner beeped once, routine. The young private monitoring the screen frowned. Something denser than coaxial connectors flashed in the image. He cleared his throat, trying to sound authoritative. "Ma'am, do you have any metallic pins or electronics not declared?" Rory answered with a measured monotone that hid the hum inside her veins. "No prohibited electronics, just tools and personal items. Feel free to inspect." She could have shoved a colonel's clearance in his face and sauntered through the remission clause deactivated her field privileges, but not the priority code embedded in the card's magnetic strip. Yet she chose subserve. It was safer. Private Bradford badge, crooked acne burning red under fluorescent wrath, gestured to a stainless steel table and began emptying the bag, a travel mug, a dog-eared moles Skin a microdriver set the cedar token, the oatmeal pack a folded cotton t-shirt. Items clacked like guilty coins into a plastic tray. Clipboard sergeant wandered over scenting entertainment, and soon a half-circle of board security techs gathered, elbows propped on the rail, eyes hungry for anomaly. Bradford reached the final zipper. Rory's pulse tightened, but her face remained the color of stone. The leather case tumbled out weightless yet urgent. Landing beside a pair of oil-blotched gloves, the private flipped it open and time became viscous. The black Falcon caught the overhead light with a shimmer so subtle most people would miss it, but those who knew that infinite decimal fraction of military personnel whose clearances scraped the stratosphere recognized absolutes in that shimmer. No fail. Missions, bodies buried under desert moons, a single radio, coal that could redirect satellites. Bradford saw none of that. He saw a bird and a lightning bolt. Clipboard sergeant, however, inhaled as though the air had barbed wire in it. The room's chatter collapsed somewhere behind the scanners. A phone rang twice and stopped. A silent alarm to supervisory control. Sergeant lowered his shades, pupils constricted. Breath exited between clenched teeth. He glanced at Rory, then at the emblem, then at his men, calculation flickering like static across his jaw. What he said next was almost a whisper, but it carried through the checkpoint like rifle crack. Bogart, nobody moves. Bradford blinked, confused. Rory felt the shift in power. The way mariners feel pressure before a squall, primordial, undeniable. Two MPs appeared as if conjured, hands resting on holsters. Regulation theater, but the fear in their eyes betrayed ignorance. They didn't know what they were guarding, only that the sergeant suddenly acted as if they stood beside a live bomb. Rory raised her hands, slowly, palms outward, a gesture of compliance that also let her fingers hover centimeters from her ID lanyard. She could, with one swipe, invoke the code that would dissolve this entire tableau beneath a wave of black-level overrides, but she waited, observed, calculated. Clipboard sergeant snapped at Bradford to seal the bag but leave the emblem visible. He wanted command to see it. The moment they arrived, he wanted credit for capture of what the thought pulsed behind Rory's sternum. She was no longer an operator, she was a clerk who used recycled coffee pods twice before disposal. Yet the emblem told a louder, older story, one that outranked Clipboard fantasies by galaxies. That story began to leak into the room. Air grew thin, footsteps hushed. Even the buzzing exit sign dimmed under the weight of its own electricity. An unmarked SUV screeched to a halt outside. Two officers in midnight blue dress approached at a jog. No rank pins, no name tags, only the subdued patch of air combat command stitched into their shoulders. Sergeant's face drained to chalk. He grabbed Rory's sleeve with possessive twitch, then released it when the taller officer barked his name. Sergeant Fields, explained. Fields gestured to the table, mouth working soundlessly. The tall officer's gaze shifted to the emblem, and Rory watched déjà vu ripple across features. Schooled never to reveal emotion, he composed himself, inhaled, then looked at her, not at her ID, not at the bag, but directly, as if scanning bone for barcodes. Lieutenant Commander Vale, he said, statement not questioned. Why is a red Falcon operator moving through this gate without escort? A dozen heads pivoted toward her. The phrase Red Falcon detonated quietly in the checkpoint, blowing holes in every assumption about the plain woman in logistics khakis. Rory spoke for the first time since the humiliation started, her voice low, measured, polished, smooth by years of silence. Because, Colonel, this operator signed remission. I'm a non-combatant. Clerk, paragraph 12. C authorizes independent base transit under standard protocols. Colonel's eyes flicked to Fields, to Bradford, to the silent MPs, then back to Rory. Paragraph 12. C also stipulates operators travel without identifiers that compromise their remission. Care to explain why that pin is in your possession? Rory exhaled through her nose, a gesture of weariness rather than defiance. Because I was advised to keep it. A reminder, she didn't add, of what she didn't need to the Colonel Wade responses. Politics simmered behind his eyes. Security staff fidgeted, shrinking beneath tensions. Couldn't name. Finally he nodded. Once Kurt, sergeant, return her property log. A procedural error, then cleared this gate within the hour. Fields opened his mouth to protest. The Colonel cut him down with a glance. That's an order. Bradford swept items back into Rory's bag with hands that trembled just enough to clatter the tools. When he reached the leather case, he hesitated, holding it as though it might electrocute him. Rory took it gently, slid it into the bag, zipped the pocket, and slung the canvas strap over her shoulder. No apology came. Humiliation never rewinds. But as she stepped past, the metal detector voices chased her down the corridor, whispers thick with speculation, fear, and newfound respect. By the time Rory reached Building 9, she had tamped the episode into a tight compartment in her mind, yet its aftershocks crept through the day like hairline fractures. The JSOC request now looked less random. Phone calls she couldn't trace pinged her extension, then vanished. Even the breeze outside smelled sharper, as if reality itself had shifted tint. At 1500 hours, a courier delivered a sealed envelope bearing no return code inside a single sheet, black ink on gray cardstock. Red Falcon recall protocol effective immediately. Remission suspended under Article 7. Report to Hangar 6. 1900 hours. Signature redacted. Heat surged from her spine to throat. Article 7 recall was myth. The nuclear option of clandestine governance. It meant a scenario so critical, so temporally constrained, that the living assets of an erased unit were considered the only fail-safe. She counted the hours to 1900, felt each second land like a weight on a scale, tipping back toward the woman she had tried so hard to bury. Around her, Building 9 clattered with normally printers spooling manifests, keyboards tapping freight codes, while in her mind hangar doors yawned over black projects and ghosts long thought buried at 1830. She closed her computer, locked the drawers, and left the office exactly as the janitorial checklist required. Trash tied blinds half dropped. Desktop cleared because habits of order survive catastrophe. She walked the service alley past dumpsters humming with flies, past the chain-link fence where prairie grass bent beneath hot wind, and toward the flight line where hangars crouched like dark animals against a bruised sky. Every step stripped a layer of civilian pretense until only muscle memory guided her. Breathe through the heels, scan quadrants, catalog exits. The sun bled orange across the tarmac, its dying light catching the curved aluminum of an aircraft she hadn't seen in 13 years, a stealth reconnaissance bird that was officially decommissioned but now glimmered like a resurrected god at the mouth of Hangar 6. Two silhouettes waited under its wing, one tall, one compact, both draped in matte black flight suits that only Red Falcon alumni ever wore. The taller figure raised a hand, not a wave, a signal. Code spelling Valkyrie. Rory's old call sign static roared in her ears. She reached the edge of shadow and the smaller silhouette stepped forward, night vision, eyes gravel, voice long time. Vale. Rashid, she answered, surprised at the steadiness of her own tone. I was told you were KIA. He shrugged, scarred mouth twitching. Reports of my death were a strategic necessity. Then he jerked a thumb toward the bird. Wheels up in 40, briefing inside. We're going back where she almost asked, but part of her already knew. East of 50 East, in a desert whose sand still bore the imprint of her kneeling form as she whispered extraction codes into a blood-slick radio. The day Red Falcon disbanded, the past wasn't done with any of them. She followed Rashid into the hangar, boots echoing, throat tight, silent, emblem heavy against her chest. The humiliation of the morning felt trivial now, a petty tremor before the quake, yet in that tremor lay the first crack that let this avalanche through. Security had trashed her bag, but what spilled out was a ghost. The world could not deny a ghost, now slipping into moonlit altitude with vengeance on its wings. The interior of Hangar 6 swallowed sound like an ancient chapel. Cold concrete echoed faintly beneath every footstep. The tall vated ceiling arched in black steel ribs that had once supported the birth of experimental aircraft. Now it housed ghosts. Flood lights glowed soft and surgical across the underbelly of the recon jet, casting distorted silhouettes against the metallic walls. Three figures reunited by something older than duty and darker than command. Rory stood at the center of it, her posture rigid without trying, arms crossed loosely but shoulders taut. Beside her, Rashid walked with the rolling gait of a man whose legs had been rebuilt by necessity, not grace. The third figure, lean, unreadable, wrapped in silence like a shroud, remained near a folding table where a single screen displayed a frozen satellite frame of terrain Rory hadn't seen in over a decade. It was desert, and not just any. The kind of desert that didn't appear on conventional maps, where rivers dried mid-sentence and villages collapsed under wind and rumor. In the image, a compound of low whitewashed structures, ringed by fencing that cast no shadow, guarded by figures too pixelated to identify except one in the center. Courtyard and outline. Rory recognized immediately the bent knee of a man in submission, hands bound behind him, shadowed by two figures and asymmetrical gear. But it wasn't the kneeling prisoner that froze her blood, it was the object just beside him, a box, matte black, barely larger than a backpack, but unmistakable. She spoke before she could stop herself. That can't be. That unit was destroyed. The silent figure turned. Lieutenant Julia Keene, call sign Moth, last seen 7 years ago, presumed lost during a failed intercept in the Caspian corridor, but her face was unmistakable. Older, yes, the softness weathered away, but her stare still carried that strange deliberate weight that once could silence entire briefings. She didn't nod, didn't smile, just gestured toward the screen and said, that box wasn't part of the failed program, it's a successor and it's active. Rory exhaled slowly, mind catching up to the implications. If it was active, then someone had access to the original encryption to the Red Falcon archives, to material that had been promised locked forever in an Arctic server silo with a suicide burn built into the kernel. Rashid grunted and crossed his arms. We think the box was moved 2 weeks ago, not by Jackik, not by anyone on the Five Eyes grid. This was internal, deep internal. Rory didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply stared at the grainy image until the silence said enough. Moth turned away and tapped twice on the screen. A new image flickered into place. Another satellite frame, this one of a downed drone scattered across rock, partially disassembled. She pointed to a marking on one of the inner fins. Rory squinted. It was faint, worn, barely distinguishable through the pixelation, but there it was, a falcon, partially burned away, one of their old birds. The implication wasn't just betrayal, it was resurrection. Someone had taken pieces of Red Falcon scraps, relics, forgotten tech, and reassembled them into something operational, something mobile, something pointed at the wrong side of the board. Rashid leaned forward. They didn't just pull our wreckage from that mountain. They reprogrammed it. Whoever's behind this doesn't want to revive the Falcon, they want to hijack it. Keane added, we don't know who yet, but the compounds. In Helmand Province, civilian cover. Last operatives who went and joined Italian SIGINT team went dark. All we got was one still image in this. She held up a small object between two gloved fingers. Rory recognized the material instantly. Carbon weave, dog tags, standard issue, only 2 deep cloak operatives. The code etched into it was hers, or rather it was her backup alias, a decoy identity used only once in a mission that had never been declassified, and now someone had retrieved it for the first time in years. Rory felt the edges of herself reconfiguring, not just muscle memory, not just instinct, but something deeper. Purpose, the kind of cold, clean purpose that eroded fear. She nodded once slowly. They're baiting us, whoever this is. They knew we'd come. Keane said nothing. Rashid muttered, and we're going anyway. Rory looked at the recon jet's wing sleek. Silent, still warm from calibration. What's the window? 17 hours. Extraction must happen in 6. Infill happens at 0300 local. You'll go in alone. They'll spot more than one. I assumed as much. Her tone was flat, not brave, just final. Keane reached into a case beside the monitor and pulled out a patch-stitched black thread. The Falcon and bolt, same as before, but this one had been altered. A crimson border now surrounded the emblem. A silent signal. No backup, no communications trace, no extraction unless the mission completes. Not a threat, a fact. Rory took it, ran her thumb over the stitching, then Keane added without emotion, they cleared your remission. You're activated. Rory didn't respond. She simply reached into her canvas bag, the same one that had been trashed by the checkpoint guards hours earlier, and slid the emblem back into its own side pocket. Then she zipped it shut, not hiding it this time, but holstering it, returning it to service. By the time the briefing ended, she had already stripped off her base uniform, pulled on the suit that still fit her like second skin, and tightened the final strap of her old wristband, the one with the 3 notches she had carved herself the night before her first mission back, when her name still meant something only to herself. At 1941 the jet rolled into the dark, silent, purposeful. At 1943 the base's satellite feed reclassified her profile from support to field activated. The checkpoint guard saw it change in real time and said nothing. At 1947 the sky swallowed the plane whole, and beneath her seat, tucked in the same pocket where oatmeal used to live, the Falcon emblem glinted faintly under the soft red light of the cabin. An old secret reborn. Altitude stripped the sound from her ears long before the horizon appeared. At 37,000 feet above Afghanistan's southern corridor, the recon jet drifted like a thought through the jet dream, silent and cold, its fuselage wrapped in black polymer skin that drank radar and moonlight alike. Inside, Rory sat alone, eyes closed, breath steady, every nerve sinking back into the operating rhythm she'd once lived by. Attention split into quadrants, memory flowing in lateral stacks, emotion suppressed in favor of mathematics. Below her stretched terrain she'd walked once before, on foot, under fire, under orders that had left 10 bodies buried in soil that didn't belong to them, and 1 child alive who was never supposed to be there. The mission briefing had described an objective: extract the black box, intercept a local handler, disappear. But Rory had seen the timing, the signals, the way the data was found. To why silly, this wasn't a recovery. It was a test, or worse, a setup. At 241 local time the plane banked southeast and dropped to a whispering glide over jagged terrain. She released the seat straps without ceremony, slipped into a thermal harness and sealed the drop mask over her jaw. No countdown, just gravity. And then she was gone. She landed in near silence, her chute absorbing into sand like a black veil, collapsing, crouched, rifle up, scanning. No movement, no wind, just dust coiled into stillness. It took her 8 minutes to reach the compound. Its walls were low, mud-brick perimeter designed to look civilian, but symmetrical, too wide around the edges to be anything but paramilitary. She found an access point near the western power box and waited. The silence was surgical. She slipped inside, following the heat trace of the image from the briefing. In a courtyard box in the center, prisoner kneeling, except there was no prisoner now, just the box and the person who stood beside it, a woman dressed in matte black gear, unarmed, face uncovered in unmistakable moth. Keane the same. The woman who had briefed her 24 hours earlier. For a second Rory's breath caught. She raised her weapon but didn't fire, because the look in Moth's eyes wasn't hostile, it was sad. She spoke. First, I told you they reactivated Red Falcon. I didn't say who reactivated it. Rory stayed frozen. What is this? Moth's hand stayed visible. They brought us here to see if we'd come willingly, to see who would return when called. You're not with JSOK. No one is, not anymore. The box at her feet hissed, a soft venting of heat, a red light blinking once, twice, like heartbeat. Rory stepped closer. What's in it? Proof, Moth answered. Not of our orders, not of their war, but of what they did to us. Rory lowered her weapon by inches. Moth continued, voice calm. You were right. This wasn't about extraction. This was about revelation. The emblem in your bag, they planted it there. You didn't pack it. Rory blinked. Number. I zipped that bag myself. You zipped what they gave you. Behind her the black box clicked once. Moth nodded. Toward it. They don't want to control us anymore, they want to erase us. Entirely, but they needed to see who still responded, who still remembered. Rory's mouth was dry, so they set a trap. No, Moth said. We did. In that instant the ground shook faintly, not from below but from above. A vibration across the courtyard, a signal. Rory turned slowly and looked to the eastern sky, a drone formation barely visible but unmistakable. She whispered, "Those are ours." Moth shook her head. Not anymore. The box hissed again. On its surface, a symbol appeared, not the falcon, not the bolt, but a name. Red Falcon Archive 01. It wasn't a weapon, it was a memory vault. Rory stared at it, realization blooming in her chest like fire. This wasn't a strike mission, it was a broadcast. Every mission, every kill order, every denied operation Red Falcon had executed over 15 years was stored inside, and it was now online. Moth turned, her voice cold now. The moment they scanned your bag, the clock started. The emblem wasn't just symbolic, it was a beacon. We were the trigger, and now the world will see who we really were. Rory stepped back, not out of fear, but you're burning it all down. No, Moth said, we're letting them see the ashes. Then from above the first signal flickered across the sky, a brief pulse of blue that stirs silently from horizon to horizon. Transmission began. Silence shattered inside bases around the world. Encrypted terminals blinked. Names, decrypted files, unlocked photos surfaced, and the codename Valkyrie, Rory's, scrolled across classified feeds seen by presidents, generals, and ghosts. She didn't move, didn't speak. She simply lowered her rifle, stepped toward the box, and sat beside Moth. The weight of years finally finding a place to settle. The war they had buried had come home, and this time no one could pretend it didn't exist. The world didn't end with a bang or a siren, it ended with a red notification on 1,000 black screens inside NATO command centers underground. Bunkers, aircraft carriers, and embassies. Senior officers stopped mid-sentence as encrypted feeds cracked open like old bones. The emblem appeared first, a falcon clutching a bolt, then a list of names, some dead, some presumed dead, and others, like Rory Vale, suddenly unerased. She watched it unfold from a room beneath the compound, sitting in the dark beside the still humming black box, her heart calm in the eye of a storm she hadn't fully understood until now. Above her, Moth monitored the stream without emotion, occasionally adjusting the data pulse or muting inbound attempts to sever the signal. Attempts failed. The system was hardened beyond anything conventional. What they had unleashed wasn't a leak, it was a confession machine, a vault they had spent years constructing from fragments of intercepted logs, erased recordings, burnt after read memos, and ghost transmissions salvaged from the dark edges of Falcon's collapse. It had one purpose: to show that cost of silence. The stream reached embassies in Berlin, Tokyo, Cambodia, Buenos Cairo. Former allies blinked at footage of unauthorized strikes, ghost detainments, secret renditions tagged with names of operatives who were supposed to never have existed, families who had received caskets with no bodies, saw for the first time what happened in corridors never built on maps, and in one particular Pentagon terminal an aging general sat motionless as a clip loaded, showing his own voice, authorizing the liquidation of Asset Valkyrie in 2011. An order never carried out. Rory saw it to the date, the location, her own image, entering a building in Homs, Syria 20 minutes before an IED collapsed the wing. They had tried to erase her once before, not metaphorically, literally. She leaned back, hand resting on her knee, and felt nothing but clarity. There was no rage, no heartbreak, just confirmation. Moth finally spoke. It's reached the final node. Nothing can stop it now. The entire archive will be mirrored and replicated globally within 42 minutes. Rory nodded slowly. And after that we disappear again, but not as ghosts, as consequences outside. The wind shifted, not violent, just different, a change in the weight of the night. They had set fire to the structure that created them, and now it would burn in every direction. Red Falcon wasn't being resurrected, it was being laid bare so that it could never be rebuilt. For Rory that was enough. Not justice, not vengeance, just the truth, finally free of containment. When she rose from the chair, her knees arched, not from age but from use. The flight out would be untraceable, silent, uncelebrated. There would be no medals, no apologies, no official record of what had been done tonight. But for the first time in years she no longer needed any of it. She picked up the emblem and placed it in her palm. It was warm, not with power but with closure. 3 weeks later the checkpoint at Falcon Ridge was replaced, not upgraded, removed. The men who had dumped her bag were reassigned without warning. Internal memos marked it as a routine personnel shift, but those who were there knew better, and the supply annex, Rory's desk, remained empty. No explanation was given, no box cleared. The drawer still held a faded notebook, one spoon, a metal ring with a burned edge. Across the world the stream faded slowly from headlines buried under noise, reclassified under new codenames, but something lingered, not in the news, not in policy, but in silence, in the way younger officers paused at locked doors, in how colonels no longer laughed when a woman stepped into the room, in the occasional whisper when a drone lost signal mid-flight and someone muttered Red Falcon. Rory Vale was gone again. Not buried, not hidden, just folded into the fabric of consequence. She had never asked for recognition, only to not be erased. Now in some dark archive the world knew her name. That was enough. Some stories don't end with applause, some end With silence and the quiet knowledge that the truth was seen if you stayed until the end. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done in her place? And if you believe stories like hers deserve to be remembered, share this one. Somebody out there needs